Hey guys, today we're going to talk about tuples and sets. Previously, in our last video, we talked about lists, and today we want to talk about tuples and sets, which are both of them are some data collections in Python like lists, but there are some differences between lists, tuples, and sets. Okay, all three of these data collection types, or we can say data types, are used to collect multiple data types like integers, like strings, like floats, like booleans in one variable. Okay, but as we saw in our previous video about lists, lists have multiple methods. We can do many things in them, and lists are ordered, so they have a specific index. Each element has specific indexes. We can add something to a list, we can remove something from a list, we can modify the elements in the list, so we can replace them, we can find index for them, and many other things. But there are two other types we have now, and those are tuples and sets. The difference between these data collections is that tuples are immutable, but they are ordered. So it means that each element in a tuple has a specific index in a specific order that they are saved. Okay, but we cannot add anything to a tuple, or we cannot remove anything from a tuple, or we cannot modify anything in a tuple. Okay, it's a package that is unchangeable. But there's another data type we have, and that is sets. Okay, sets are unordered data collections, and each element in a set is unique. Okay, I mean, we cannot have duplicates in a set. We cannot have two apples, for example, in a set. If we enter two apples in a set, whenever we want to print that, for example, set, we get just one apple, and one of them is removed because duplicates are not allowed in sets. Okay, each of these data collections have their own applications. We can use lists for almost anything. We can use tuples for more specific data collections that we don't want them to be changed. For example, for coordinates, or I don't know, for data sets. Okay, we use tuples, or we use sets for example, hash tables, for mapping and something like this, that we want unique items. Okay, so let's see in code that what are tuples and sets. We identify sets between curly braces, so all the elements of a set are wrapped between two curly braces. As we can remember, in lists, datas or items are wrapped between two braces, but in sets they are curly braces, and in tuples they are just parentheses. Okay, so our elements are wrapped between two parentheses. Okay, so let's run this code. First, let's explain what is happening. We identified three variables here: dataset 1, 2, 3. Dataset 1 is a list, dataset 2 is a set, and dataset 3 is a tuple, and all of them contain the same elements. and those elements are a string, an integer, another string which is the same as the first string. Both of them are apple. We have an emoji, we have a boolean, we have I should say that emojis are not data types, it's just a string. We have booleans, we have floats, and we have none. And now we want to print each data set, their type, and the length of each data set to see what happens. So let's run this code. So as you can see, our data collections or our data sets are printed now. The first data set is set 1, is a list, and it has a length of 7. Our second data set is a set, as we can see. It has a length of 6. I'll come back here. And the last one is a tuple. It is printed, it's a tuple, and it has a length of 7. But what happened here? These data collections are all the same. The 3 of them are all the same. But what happens here that we have the length of 6 here? As you can see, our first and third data sets, which are list and tuple, both has the apple at first, 1, 2, 3 as the second item, again apple as the third item, emoji, boolean, and float, and none. Okay, but here our set is not ordered as what we told it, as what we entered before, as how we created it. Okay, so the emoji is at the first index, then we have the boolean, then we have the string, then we have the integer, and so on. And as you can see, there is just one apple in this collection, in this data set, and that is because, as we talked previously, sets are unique, so there are no duplicates allowed in sets. Okay, so it just removed one of the apples, one of these strings, and just printed one of them. Okay, so the length is 6. We talked about the differences, so let's jump into this part. Here I just typed some code examples for the sake of speed, and let's run them one by one and see what happens. So the first block is for set, and set is our dataset 2. As you can remember, this is our set, and this is how it is printed uniquely without any duplicate values or variables. Okay, so let's run this code. Here we have one print that prints the dataset before changing anything, and then we have the code we want, and lastly we have the dataset again. So if there is any changes, we can see. Let's run this code, and as you can see, we get an error, an attribute error. This attribute error is saying that set object has no attribute count. And why is that, you think? That's because any element, any item in a set is unique. So if you enter, for example, 3 apples, it will be just 1 apple. Okay, 2 of them will be removed. So it doesn't mean anything that we want to count something in a set. They're all one, they're all unique. Okay, so we don't have count method here, but as you can remember, we had it in lists. Okay, in lists we could count any item. So let's the second block of code. Again, there's a before, there's a after, and there is something we want to do. So let's run this one. what happens? Again, we have attribute error that says set object has no attribute index, and that is because sets are unordered. So whenever you run your code, the items in a set will be shuffled. There is no order for them, so indexing does not mean anything. Okay, let's run the third block of code, and here we want to add banana to our data set, to our set. Okay, let's run this block of code, and as you can see, before we had a hamburger, true, apple, 1 2 3, a float, and a none. And after adding banana, we have hamburger, boolean, banana, apple, 1 2 3, float, and none. And it just entered the banana in a random index in our set, because order does not mean anything here. So randomly it puts the banana between any two elements, or at the beginning of the set or at the end of the set. Okay, it does not pay attention to indexing. So let's run the fourth block of code, and let's see what happens. As we can see, before we had hamburger, we had boolean, we had banana, apple, 1 2 3, and so on. And after removing apple, we called remove method here. So we want to remove apple from our set. So as we can see, there is no apple anymore in our set. Okay, so we can add something to our set and we can remove something from it. And as you can guess, the pop method that we had in lists do something here. That is popping something out of this, let's say, set. As you can see, there's no hamburger in the after version of our data set. Okay, and let's see this block of code, and that is unpacking a set. As we had in lists, we had unpacking a list. So as you can remember, or if you don't remember, I suggest you to check that video. We could unpack the items in a list in some different variables, and we have this one here again in sets. Okay, so as you can see, if I run this code now, before it was we had this set. Now we want to access the item 1, item 2, and the last item. So item 1 is true, item 2 is banana, and the last item is none. So they are all printed. And let's see the last block of code here, and let's see what happens. And that is a for loop. So we want to execute a for loop on our set. Okay, so let's run it. And as you can see, now we printed each item separately. We used a for loop, and for each item we want to print that item. And as we can see, true is printed, banana is printed, 1 2 3 is printed, float is printed, and none is printed. Okay, so counting and indexing does not mean anything in sets, because they are unordered and all the elements are unique. Okay, but we can add something to a set, we can remove something from a set, we can unpack a set, we can use for loops to access elements in a set, and there's no problem with these operations. Now let's see what happens if we do the same operations on a tuple. Okay, as you can remember, tuples are wrapped, or all the items in a tuple are wrapped between two parentheses. and our data set 3 is a tuple, okay? And it contains these elements: apple, 2 apples, 1 integer, 1 float, true and non, and an emoji, okay? Let's run this first block of code, and it just counts any element in a list or in a tuple. So there's no problem in counting. We couldn't count the elements in sets because sets elements are unique, and so they don't have any duplicates, so there's no meaning to count them. But we can count items in tuples because we can have duplicate or multiple versions of one item in a tuple as in a list, okay? So we can count. We can use the count method in tuples. Let's see if we can use the index method in a tuple or not. So if we run it, I said I want the index of apple in the tuple, and it returned 0. So we can we can access the indexes of any item in a tuple. So it means tuples are ordered, and that means each item in a tuple has a specific index that corresponds to its location in that tuple, okay? So we can use index in tuples as in lists, but not as in sets, because in sets indexing does not mean anything because sets are unordered. Let's run this block of code. Let's run it. Here we wanted to add banana to our tuple. Oh, it does not. So as you can see, we get attribute error when we try to add something in a tuple. So as we said before at the beginning of this video, tuples are unchangeable or unmutable, okay? So we cannot add anything to them, or we cannot remove anything from them, okay? So let's comment this block and run this block of code, which we want to remove apple from our tuple. Let's see what happens. And as we can see, it again says tuple object has no attribute removed because we cannot change tuples. And as you can guess what happens here, we cannot use pop2 because we cannot remove anything from tuples. Tuples are unchangeable. But we can unpack a tuple. Okay, so if I run this block of code, I'm trying to unpack a tuple in item 1 variable, item 2 variable, rest of the things, and the last item in item L variable. And if I print it, we can see that apple is printed as the first item, 1, 2, 3 is printed as the second item, and none is printed as the last item, okay? And the last thing I want to talk about is the for loop in tuples, and as you can see, we can use for loops in tuples too. So we can access each item of a tuple separately, and we can do anything we want with that item, but we cannot change that item in the tuple. So we cannot modify the item in our original tuple. If you want to modify anything, we have to create another tuple, another new tuple, and save our let's say items, our new items in that tuple, okay? So that's it. It's all about tuples and sets. We talked about lists in a previous video, something about 40 minutes. So that's all about data collections. There is another type of, let's say, data collection, and that is dictionaries. And we're going to talk about it in the next video. So if you enjoyed this video and if you don't want to miss the next video, which is about dictionaries, please like, subscribe, and hit that bell button so you won't you will not miss anything, any new video from the future. And let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. uh, that's it, and thank you for watching this video. Have a nice day.